So pretty early in the morning here, very foggy. I'm hoping the flight is going to be okay to take off, but I'm off to Aberdeen today, just for the day, back this evening to talk more Formula One. So my addiction to technology shops continues. I can't walk past these places, it's ridiculous. Just invested in a new GoPro and some accessories, so expect to see some GoPro footage coming your way soon. You know, somebody asked me on Twitter yesterday if there was a moment from my F1 career that if I could take it back, what would that moment be? And it really got me thinking. You know, we've all got things that if we look back we'd have probably done slightly differently or wish that the outcome had been slightly different. You know, for us, if there's been a car that failed or an engine that blew up or all of those kind of things that you just wish had had a slightly different outcome and then could have changed something more significant. Those things I guess you'd always take back if you could. But one that really stood out for me was that the Nurburgring European Grand Prix 2005, where Kimi's that flat spotted tyre, Kimi's tyre, let go on the last lap when he was leading the race. And for me that was a really, really big one. It was a turning point that year. I firmly believe it cost us the championship, and things could have been very, very different. But you know, we've all got moments like that in whatever career it is that we've all chosen to take on, and in life in general. But what it also got me thinking was that things like that, going into the last lap of a race, knowing that your car is on the brink of disaster at all times because it's being pushed to the absolute limit, and on that day it was because we'd pushed that flat spotted tyre to its absolute limit, but on other days it was just because we were pushing the technology to the absolute limit. And you know, that is why we love Formula One, and what it linked into for me was that we're all sort of seeing the complaints post Monaco about how things weren't being pushed to the limit and how it was a dull race, cars were going slowly, there wasn't much overtaking. I watched that race thinking about Daniel Ricciardo's car, thinking about how it could fail at any moment. Was the engine going to let go? Was he going to make it to the end? And if he did have a problem, was Sebastian Vettel or Lewis Hamilton going to be there to pick up the pieces? You know, I think we watch Formula One as much for the action on track and the overtakes and the great moves as for the unpredictability of it. And that, for me, is what we really need to keep in our sport. Unpredictability. When we get on an aeroplane, we want to know exactly what is going to happen. We want it to be totally predictable. We want to know it's going to get there safely, do exactly what we expect it to do. We don't want anything out of the ordinary to happen. But then people don't watch aeroplanes for fun, do they? I suppose some do. Now, there are different ways to introduce unpredictability in Formula One, but when I think back to some of those moments, leading back to the original question of the moments that I might take back from my F1 career, it's the moments when the unpredictability didn't fall in our favour and we had something like an engine failure or that last lap clutch problem for Mika Hakkinen, the tyre failure for Kimi, and numerous engine blow-ups because we were pushing the engine technology to its absolute limit. Every weekend we had a brand new engine that was on the extreme limits of what it could do, and that was because we were encouraged to push the boundaries for performance levels back then. And by doing so, you introduce this element where you as a viewer can't take your eyes off the screen. Even as a mechanic or an engineer in the garage, I could never sit comfortably during a race because you couldn't take your eyes off the screen not knowing whether or not the thing was about to blow up. Even if you were 40 seconds down the road in front leading the Grand Prix, you just had your fingers crossed, you were desperately hoping everything was going to be okay. And I think nowadays that's much less of an issue. And the reason it's less of an issue is because the technology has been ramped back on cost-saving grounds. Teams are no longer encouraged to push the boundaries quite so much because cost becomes such an issue. Cost is what we're all talking about in Formula One. And I totally get that. You can't just let development run completely free, because the bigger teams will spend hundreds and hundreds of millions of pounds more than the smaller ones, and you'll end up with a completely unfair playing field, and Formula One won't work that way. But what concerns me, or what worries me slightly, is that we're talking now about 2021 and beyond, where we have a number of standardised parts on the car. That's all fine, that's great, because there are some elements of a car that don't necessarily bring major performance differentials, and there's no reason you shouldn't standardise those to keep costs low. But if you're going to do that, and if you're going to do this in conjunction with a much more fair split of the prize money and the revenue to teams from Formula One, the budgets should be there for everybody to be let loose in some areas of technical development. If you can really let the teams free, have some freedom to really innovate, to really push boundaries, they then have the ability to weigh up the risk versus reward factor of how much they want to push the limits. Do they risk having some kind of experimental new part on the car, new engine, new gearbox, whatever it might be? Do they take that risk, or do they play it safe and go, guarantee they finish the Grand Prix? That's how it used to be, and quite often the risk was deemed to be worthwhile taking for that extra element of performance. And that was where our unpredictability came in. The other thing is, if you've got different teams running different types of innovations, pushing the envelope, the drivers of those cars have to drive the cars slightly differently. If they're running an exhaust blown diffuser, or a torque steer third brake pedal like McLaren had back in the day, things like F-ducts, all of these innovations, which I absolutely love, mean that drivers are doing different things at different times in different cars. And when you're doing that kind of thing, you also get a little bit of unpredictability in the fact that drivers can make mistakes, because they're having to do a little bit more in the cockpit. They're having to adapt the way they drive to a solution that might have been put on the car for that weekend. I just love to see the boundaries being pushed in certain areas. By all means, level it out in other areas, keep costs at some kind of level playing field, but allow the engineers to go crazy with some brilliant inventions and innovations that might somehow filter back into the road car industry as well, and perhaps introduce that unpredictability that I think we all crave in Formula One, whether we sort of openly know it and admit it to ourselves. We couldn't take our eyes off the screen, lots of us in Monaco, because we just weren't sure what was going to happen. And it's like that every year in Monaco. We know it's not going to be the most thrilling race unless something unpredictable happens. Right, this is the destination for today's talk. I shall talk to you again afterwards. So, just done a quick photo shoot, and our man here is just... Are you making me look younger?
I'm trying my best.
Just going through some of those, and then a quick flick through the slides up on the stage. Everyone else is having lunch, and then very quickly we'll be into it. So that was a big technology company in the oil and gas industry talking about, it's quite interesting actually, talking about how they go through change, an industry that's obviously going through massive change at the moment, how they deal with that change, how they best deliver the right solutions and make the right decisions for all of their different clients. Formula One is also going through a period of pretty big change. Under the new ownership of Liberty, looking ahead to 2021, we've also got to make sure we make the right decisions, because we've got a number of clients, haven't we? We've got to keep the fans happy, we've got to keep the teams happy, the manufacturers, we've got to keep them happy, we need to keep the various different players within Formula One happy. We've got to try and find a solution that will work best, or as best it can, for everybody, and that's never easy. I think one of the things to remember as we go through the changes of the next few years in Formula One, next year with 2019, the various aero changes that are coming, and then what will come towards 2021 with massive changes to the cars, to the formats of a race weekend, to the financial playing field that the teams will operate on. It's all going to change, and the thing to remember is that we're not going to get it all right first time. We may even find that in 2021 things are not necessarily perfect. When we deliver these brand new aerodynamic rules to the cars, it may not suddenly translate into loads of overtaking, which is what is being billed at the moment. But what's important is that we are making a change. We're embracing that change, we're taking it on, and we're starting the process. And if it doesn't quite work perfectly, then let's tweak it, let's change it, but let's use this as some kind of platform. If we don't make any change, we know exactly what the result will be. It's what we got now. And whilst there are lots of great things about what we got now, perhaps we can improve on it. So let's embrace it, let's not be too critical when it comes, and let's try and find solutions to problems rather than just complaining about them. That's my thoughts on it anyway. Right, back to the original question. Which moment from my F1 career would I change or take back if I could? Well, I'm pretty sure I know what it is. It would be the moment that Nigel Stepney and Mike Coughlin first started talking about swapping Ferrari details with McLaren and the beginnings of that whole Spygate situation. It's one of the most painful parts of my career to go through, and robbed us of a constructor's title which for me would have probably been one of the highlights, if not the highlight, of my entire career, had it turned out differently. I think it's a great question to open up to you guys too. Which moment would you love to change from F1's history? Let me know. Right, home time.